Propaganda by Stefan Molyneux from Universally Preferable Behavior. The more false the moral theory is, the earlier that it must be inflicted upon children. We do not see the children of scientifically minded people being sent to logic school from the tender age of 3 or 4 onwards. We do not see the children of free market advocates being sent to capitalism camp when they are 5 years old. We do not see the children of philosophers being sent to rational empiricism theme park in order to be indoctrinated into the value of trusting their own senses and using their own minds. No, wherever ethical theories are corrupt, self-contradictory, and destructive, they must be inflicted upon the helpless minds of dependent children. The Jesuits are credited with the proverb, "Give me a child until he is 9 and he will be mine for life." But that is only because the Jesuits were teaching superstitions and destructive lies. You could never imagine a modern scientist hungering to imprint his falsehoods on a newborn consciousness. Picture somebody like Richard Dawkins saying the above, just to see how ridiculous it would be. Keith Knight side note here. Richard Dawkins is just as irrational as any religious person he claims to be, because he advocates the government, the most dangerous, irrational religion out there. That, morality is different when a group of people called the state comes into play. So that's a perfect example of how propaganda works. Someone like Dawkins can be claiming that he believes in truth, yet can't even see the lie right in front of his face. He makes fun of Americans for being pro-gun or pro-choice regarding the gun debate, but he advocates the state have a monopoly on guns, but he's a leftist, so he's also against monopolies. Total contradiction. Moving on, any ethicist who then focuses on mere criminality rather than the institutional crimes supported by ethical theories is missing the picture almost entirely and serving mankind up to the slaughterhouse. A doctor who, in the middle of a universal and deadly plague, focused his entire efforts on communicating about the possible health consequences of being slightly overweight would be considered rather deranged and scarcely a reliable guide in medical matters. If your house is on fire, mulling over the colors you might want to paint your walls might be considered a suboptimal prioritization. Private criminals exist, of course, but have almost no impact on our lives compared to those who rule us on the basis of false moral theories. Once I was 11, another boy stole a few dollars from me. Another time when I was 26, I left my ATM card in a bank machine and someone stole a few $100s from my account. On the other hand, I've had hundreds of thousands of dollars taken from me by force through the moral theory of taxation is good. I was forced to sit in the grim and brain-destroying mental gulags of public schools for 14 years based on the moral theory that state education is a virtue, or rather, forced education is a virtue. My parents were compelled to pay through taxes, and I was compelled to attend. The boy and the man who stole my money doubtless used it for some personal pleasure or need. The government that steals my money, on the other hand, uses it to oppress the poor, to fund wars, to pay the rich, to borrow money, and so impoverish my children, and to pay the salaries of those who steal from me. If I were a doctor in the Middle Ages of a great city struck down by a terrible plague, and I discovered that that plague was being transmitted through the water pipes, what should my rational response be? If I claim to truly care about the health of my fellow citizens, surely I would cry from the very rooftops that their drinking water was causing the plague. Surely I should take every measure possible to get people to understand the true source of the illness that struck them down. Surely in the knowledge of such universal and preventable poisoning, I should not waste my time arguing that the true danger you face was the tiny possibility that some random individual might decide to poison you at some point in the future. Thus, as a philosopher concerned with violence and immorality, should I focus on private criminals or public criminals? The violations that I experienced at the hands of private criminals fade to insignificance relative to even one day under the tender mercies of my virtuous and good masters. If then the greatest dangers to mankind are false ethical theories, then our highest prioritization should be the discovery, communication, and refinement of a valid, rational, empirical, and consistent ethical theory. If we discover that the most plague victims are dying from impure water, then surely telling them to purify the water should be our first and highest priority. Let us now turn to the task.